I think we're live now. Welcome, Johnny. You are my guinea pig. You are the first. With me is Jonny Harris. How about introducing yourself?
Hi, my name's Jonny Harris. I'm from London, England, and I work for XWP. Over the last year, I've been focusing on the WordPress Core Performance project, but I've been contributing to WordPress for nearly 10 years at this point. So I've contributed to a lot of things over my time. My main focuses have been the REST API, multi-site, a lot of performance stuff under the hood, and some other features that are not performance related, like full screen of death, white screen of death protection, and a lot of stuff over the years. I got into WordPress. So how I got into WordPress core contributing is all related to performance, actually. So,
okay. So you started good. You started on the right foot.
Yeah. So a little backstory on me. I've been using WordPress since I was 15. So how many years did that? Too many years at this point. So something like 16 or 17 years I've been using WordPress, and I started as a blogger. I loved making blogs and stuff like that, and eventually turned it into my career. Worked for a couple of years for an agency, and then I joined Time Inc. So at the time, Time Inc. was the largest magazine publisher in the UK, massive amounts of traffic, and went from relatively small blogs to like the biggest blogs in the country, millions and millions of requests. And my imposter syndrome kicked in massively at that point, because I thought I was the hot dog with WordPress. Been using it for 6-7 years at that point, was really good at it, and just massively out of my depth. Didn't know what object caching was, didn't know what CDNs were, knew nothing, and felt so inferior that I just spent weeks and months just researching and getting myself up to speed and becoming obsessed about performance and doing things at scale.
Yeah.
And one of the tools that I used very heavily was a tool called New Relic, which is a tool that allows you to plot the performance of your site.
Yep.
And you have a certain amount in the graphs for how much PHP processing there is, and how much database, and how much object caching was being used. And I became obsessed with those graphs. And because we weren't in sort of pro level hosting, we were hosting ourselves in AWS. Had the ops team continually nagging me, saying, "What, why are we doing so many database requests? Why isn't object cache being used effectively?" And I just spent days and months researching through these things, finding these little nitpicky problems and things that weren't cached properly. I created this massive backlog of tickets, and I was getting really frustrated that none of them were getting any of the attention. When you contribute to WordPress straight away, you feel like
you turned your problems straight into track tickets on WordPress.org.
Yeah, because I thought I found these. I spent ages researching these things. I'm going to get tons of headway, and people are going to be really enthusiastic about this. But I didn't really get a lot of stuff, so I started attending that. A lot of the issues I found were multi-site related, and that's why I started contributing to multi-site. There were so many places where things weren't cached and loading things unnecessarily and doing weird and wonderful things. I started contributing to stuff. I had Felix, who you may know as well, also started contributing at the same time. There was a heavy theme around multi-site. Yeah, absolute legend. Love that guy. And we started contributing at the same time, and we were both so enthusiastic about WordPress performance. And over the course of probably 2 or 3 years, we sort of low-key rewrote most of multi-site to use caching.
I've seen it. Yeah.
We introduced 2 very important classes: WP Site Query and WP Network Query. Those are very heavily cached, and it allows you, rewrote all the places where database stuff. We also wrote basic CRUD functions, so very basic functions like WP Insert Site, things that you just expect to exist didn't exist in multi-site, because multi-site is a weird and wonderful thing that was kind of a hack that ended up in core. So yeah, that's my performance journey. And
what year was this?
2013 was my first contribution that made it into core. But I've been in the WordPress space since 2009.
The multi-site improvements were in
2014. were all the work that we were doing around that. And that went on for a couple of years until, unfortunately, Gutenberg came along and the focus moved away from multi-site and other parts of Core, and Matt said we need to focus on other things. But I have got other stuff into Core. One of the things me and Felix worked on was lazy loading images, which is very related to performance. So for those that don't know, it's adding a little attribute to image tag, all the image tags that load on the page. And it means that images that are lower down on the page don't actually download until you start scrolling down to them, which has massive effects on performance, the amount of network resources you use. And you've got to remember that not everyone's on these crazy fast connections or on 4 or 5G. We want to make the web as accessible as possible to people in the developing world and people with poor internet connections. And that lazy loading attribute was a relatively small piece of work, but it would have a massive effect on people,
especially considering mobile
connections. Yeah, I mean,
just mobile connections, which there are a lot of.
I spent 6 months traveling around Brazil, and massive parts of that only had 2G connections, and just trying to load BBC.
2.
Yeah, 2, not 3, 2.
Yeah.
So was really struggling to even. I remember trying to go on BBC News homepage, which is a very well optimized page, but just none of the images were downloading. I was just getting the text from that. That was a real eye-opening experience to me, that not everyone has these super fast internet connections, and these little kilobytes of things that are downloaded that don't need to be downloaded. Those really matter in those situations. And in a lot of cases, even if you do have a fast connection, you might be paying exorbitant fees to download that. So, the price of the data might be incredibly expensive. So, connection might be fast, but it might be costing them, dollars per megabyte. So this pointless stuff that's downloading, it really does matter here. But so I've been contributing for that long, and my major performance stuff that I've been doing over the last year has been around. So Google and Yoast posed this idea of a performance team. I was so excited for that. Felix is in it as well, so it's my old chum, and I work for XWP, and XWP one of XWP's core values is performance. So XWP does a lot of performance reviews and helping clients go on a performance journey. So it's made total sense. I'm working for XWP. There's this performance project we pitched in, and we've been one of the major contributors for that performance project over the last year. And I'm really proud that we didn't start it, but we are like the cheerleaders and the running the band and getting things merged into Core.
Yeah, and it's noticed. I mean, I've known you. I think we saw each other first time probably either WordCamp Edinburgh or WordCamp London, somewhere around
long time
14, 15, 16, a long time ago. So I've seen the work that the performance team has been doing, and I like what Gutenberg is doing for the project as a whole. I like how so I was a little hesitant about the full site editing component for a long while, but I've actually built about half a dozen sites now with it. So once you start to learn that, I can appreciate the project as it started, called Gutenberg. I can appreciate it a little bit more. But as you say, the focus of the performance team is, for me, still the most exciting project within WordPress. Why? Well, for the similar reasons as you mentioned. So I didn't work for a huge company, but I had some clients that had huge sites or huge spikes at certain times, unpredictable, difficult to cache, all the stuff that you don't want to see happening during such a rush. They would happen, and you would have to figure them out. So understanding all the various layers of where you can cache and what you can cache. So basically understanding the internet, the server, and the application, because all layers have some way to optimize. Sounds very, very similar to your story sounds very similar to mine in terms of learning and understanding, and then wanting to improve all the things. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of things that that can still be improved. So you mentioned Gutenberg as well. Out of curiosity, from a performance standpoint, is the web performance core team working on that at all, or sort of side-eyeing it, or how does that go?
Yeah. So for full transparency, I'm a WordPress core committer. I'm also a Gutenberg core committer as well.
Okay.
I don't really sort of sing and dance about the fact that I'm Gutenberg. I think WordPress and Gutenberg are the same thing, and I don't like I don't like any divide between the two. Yeah, I mean, so one of the things I've been doing has been using profiling tools to analyze the performance of code. One of my key passions at the moment is making sure that full site editing is as performant as regular sites. Full transparency, I've shared data publicly that full site editing sites are multitude slower, so 2 or 3 times slower.
Mm-hmm.
So an average page load on a classic theme, if that's the terminology we're using now, is around 200.
Classic theme are also still there.
Yeah, 200 milliseconds. We're looking at more like 700, or in some cases 1.1 seconds.
Wow!
So they are significantly slower. And if we're trying to push people down this route of full site editing, which, like you, I'm on board with as well from a general standpoint. Like, I like that everything's blocks now, and you can build one block and it can be everywhere. That's makes reusing code massively useful.
Mm-hmm.
But the performance isn't there at the moment, unfortunately, and it's partly because the entire page is completely configurable in the CMS. So you've got to imagine. Yeah, go for it.
Let's break it up into. So when you say performance, are we talking purely front end, or are we talking also in the editor?
I'm talking like when it renders to front end users, like the time it takes a server to render the markup on the page is significantly slower. So page load time, I guess you'd call that characteristic. It's also I'm not the biggest front end guy. I'm more of a back end person. There are still some opportunities we can do around front end stuff as well. But because everything's a block now, I think there is massive opportunities there. We have the entire markup of the page before the headers are sent, so we can do some really cool stuff on the front end about preloading assets like CSS and images, because we have the entire markup of the page before the headers are sent. So in a lot of ways, full site editing opens more opportunities than a classic theme did. But that's not the area I'm focusing on. I'm primarily focusing on. So XOP has given me some time to work on core. I've only got a limited amount of time. I think I've only got 1 or 2 days a week to work on it. So my approach has been small changes that have big impact. So I want my ideal world is I'm changing one line of code and I'm shaving off 10% of the page load, which is, in some cases I've done that, which is freaking awesome.
You have done
that.
I've been able. Yes.
Yeah, I've done that multiple times, and the first one I was like, "That's cool." Being able to do it multiple times is we start those performances are really starting to rack up, and you're like, "Oh, that's 30% of a page load just gone." Like that's awesome.
The one standing out the most is the one that got added to WordPress 6.1.
Yeah, so
that was measurable.
Query cache.
The query cache. That was measurable. One of the sites I still maintain. I measured before, I measured after. Huge.
But that was all. The reason that we did that was because of full site editing. So full site editing, every single part of that page is all. Full site editing is configurable in the CMS. The way you make it configurable is it's actually a hidden custom post type, right? So templates and template parts, they're registered post type, core post types, if you want to call it that. And even if you don't you're just using it plain. You haven't gone in and configured it. It's still doing a lookup every single template part, every single template. It's doing a WP query to go get that post.
Yeah.
Because there was no caching on WP query. If you had 40 posts on a page, which is not an unreasonable, let's say 20, 40, every time you were loading the template part for single, it was doing a database request to go get it. Even if it wasn't there, it would still do it 40 times. And you were seeing 40, 50, 70 duplicate queries on the page. And you just think, well, that's just absolutely nuts, isn't it? Like, if you've done nothing, even if it was there, it's doing these data requests completely pointlessly. So, WP query caching, absolutely massive piece of performance work, but
I didn't know.
We got it into the core because of full set editing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of what Gutenberg does from a PHP level is completely transparent, because I don't think people really talk about it. People always, when we talk about Gutenberg, the primary focus is on, look how shiny the UI is. It's never really around what's it doing,
which is why I asked.
From a PHP standpoint.
Yeah, which is why I asked my question.
I think we need to open the curtain there and say, look, this is what it's doing behind the curtain. And a lot of that stuff, I don't want to be disparaging of the Gutenberg team, but the way that the Gutenberg project works is functionality is built in the plugin, and it's kind of built very quickly. So it's kind of fail fast is the mechanism of Gutenberg, which is I totally understand that they want to build things quickly and iterate.
It has its advantages,
but it's kind of not compatible with the rest of core, which is this massive legacy code base where we move very slowly. We make very, very small changes to it.
Yeah.
And things, unfortunately, over the last couple of, I don't know, probably the last 5 releases, a lot of things that were temporary things that were hacked together for the plugin to make sure it would work end up in core that shouldn't really have ended up in core, in my personal opinion. We should have spent a bit more time to architect them to be more performant, to have more filters and plugin,
So
and
I would say that's the context of you sharing this is performance, but I think this is typical of the project itself, because it's not just performance where this is hurting. There's also other elements of the Gutenberg project with the block editor or full site editor, it's called now, where this approach is hurting, I would say. But
I don't say this to disparage anyone.
No,
everyone on the project has got they want to deliver this awesome functionality as quickly as possible, and they want it to be awesome and people to use it.
Yeah.
But when there's so much of the web relies on this stuff, if things are poorly architected and we don't want to break backwards compatibility, we have to work even harder to ensure poorly architected code still works with the backwards compatible thing.
Because you added it.
I just want to move a little slower personally and architect things in a way that is sustainable for the future. But again, that's not the way that they do it. So I'm not here to question it. I'm just trying to, I did a lot of work in 6.0 and 6.1 in the beta and RC phases of going in and using profiling tools. I think I've tweeted publicly about stuff. When I find stuff, I'm like, I'm publicizing it not to shame people, just to be like, look, this is an aspect that no one even thought about when they built this, and we need to put a highlight of, like, if you're going to use featured images, for example, you need to ensure that is loaded in one database request instead of 10 database requests. And there was already a mechanism in core to do that, but because these new full site editing themes don't use that mechanism, it didn't work. So every single featured image was doing a single database request, which, again, if you have an example of a long page, but it could happen. You could have 40 articles on a page. That's 40 database queries you could replace with one database query. And a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is is honestly quite simple stuff, but it's just with the haste of doing stuff, it was missed. That's why we have a team, and that's why we have a performance team to work on this stuff and to help these people out, because maybe performance isn't their skill set. Maybe it's JavaScript, maybe it's something else.
Yeah.
We have to work together as a team to help each other.
Would you say that, so before I jumped in the world of working on my own agency and stuff, I used to work at a large insurance company here in the Netherlands. I was a project manager working on IT projects within an HR environment. And every single project that I did had to have a software architect on board. Even though at the beginning, when I didn't really know what that person did, I was like, okay, fine, sure. But as I worked there for almost 6 years, you quickly learn what they're doing and with what mindset they're doing it, and also what the ultimate benefit of that is. Would you say, I mean, I'm kind of reading between the lines in terms of what's happening, that a dedicated role like that would be, is that something we need? Is that something or are there team members who pick up that role, sort of? I mean, I kind of hear you saying you kind of take that up as let's take a slow.
But I don't like the term architect. So
interesting. Why?
So I've come up, when I started contributing, there were already a bunch of people that had commit access, and in my head I called them the WordPress gods, right? But you can like talk to them and try and convince them of things.
You can actually talk to the gods. That's nice.
You can talk to the gods, but the gods have their own plans, right?
Yeah.
And I always, as from an outside perspective, I always felt there was some like secret club that they had or secret Slack room I was not involved in, and it's very exclusionary, and it feels very anti the project, the WordPress project, of being open.
Sure.
To have someone who's a WordPress god or an architect feels the same way. Like, someone that has a say. I think ultimately open source is about who shows up, and
yeah, for sure.
If part of the reason why there may be performance problems in Gutenberg, I'm not saying there is, but if there was performance problems, is because the right people aren't showing up to help, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to give my 15 years of experience with WordPress that context is incredibly valuable to these people. Some of these people are new contributors who don't have that context of why on earth is a database table called this weird name, or why are we using this weird function, or why do we have to maintain these filters? Like, they may not know that, and it's I'd rather see myself as a mentor to help these people and educate them than an architect.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. I think if from my perspective, that's more about semantics. Because I think a good systems architect, software architect, is and should be a mentor, because they have knowledge on a different level, and with that, helping anyone new coming along. But I understand the difference it means to you. That makes sense.
I got commit access after contributing for 9 years, and I think that's a big mark. That is if there's any badge that I wanted, it was the commit access, because I think that does give you the right to, if someone comes along and say, we're doing it this way, and I go, well, I have commit access, so I ultimately can say whether this goes into core or not. So that is that. But I am so conscious that I was on the other side of that not less than a year ago, and someone that may, some of these patches can take days and weeks. You just have no idea how long someone spent on something. To have someone come in and just kick over your toys and say no, it's so discouraging, and it will discourage people to leave. And it just takes someone to change their tone from no, this is a terrible idea, to let's reframe this and try and be supportive. I spend a lot of time messaging people privately that are new contributors and try and help them to contribute in a productive way, because some people, they're so keen to change things, and they just want to rip WordPress down and rewrite it, and you go,
yeah. I'd love that too, mate, but baby steps.
It's funny, like the people that work on WordPress hate WordPress the most. I heard that once. I think Ryan McHugh told me that once. Like the architect, like no sane person would have architected WordPress in its current form. The reason why it's in its current position is because of backwards compatibility. It's been around for wherever it is, and there's so much stuff that, you know, if I was to go mad with my commit access, I would just rip systems out, I rip widgets out, I rip all these systems that don't make any sense anymore in modern WordPress. But we have to keep them in because someone might be running their knitting blog from 15 years ago and it's still going strong, and we don't want to break it.
Change the database schema.
Oh yeah, there's you know, I think anyone that spent any time working on WordPress would have a grocery list of things that they would change straight away.
Yeah,
we just can't.
No. So I'm thinking about the performance side of things. You have, I don't know, more than a dozen different metrics that you can use to measure performance. In picking the things you focus on, what kind of tools are you using? Because I remember you sharing a spreadsheet, performance measuring, the 2016, 2017, all the different themes on different PHP versions, on, you know, how fast is this actually going? How many database queries are we making? The database time to render throw back information.
Yeah.
What kind of tools do you use, and what kind of performance problems do you like solving most? Like what tickles you the most in that regard?
So I have long been a big fan of a plugin called Query Martyr by WordPress core contributor called John Billion. Again, he was one of the WordPress gods that I was talking about earlier. And anything he says, I will listen to, because he's just so knowledgeable and just gets the project. That is an amazing tool. It's free. It works. You can incorporate into your. And I strongly recommend anyone who's building a plugin or theme to have that installed on their local dev environment to just be mindful of how many database queries that are running. Recently, I've started using a tool called Blackfire. So that's a PHP profiling tool. It's a paid for solution, but they have
Blackfire?
options. Yeah. And you can sign up for a free license if you're doing an open source project. I've actually had a meeting with them, and they're very keen to give the WordPress community the tools, you know, for free. And they've even talked about helping us build out a CI pipeline to do performance measuring on like GitHub Actions. So, you know, push a change, you could see a regression in performance.
Right. So measure what it actually has as an impact. Yeah,
which would be freaking awesome to. Yeah. You know, in my imagination, I have this idea of like a red bell going, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure
the page is now 20 milliseconds slower. What did you break, kind of thing. That would be awesome. That's where we're not there yet, but
I think
the tools are available to do that, and I want to get to that at some point.
Yeah.
Those are the two major things, tools that I've been using. The things that get me really excited. So, I'm in the Core Performance project. I'm the lead of object caching. So, the two things that I've been really focusing on is better utilization of object caching. So, how we load data into cache, both persistent and non-persistent versions of object caching.
So
and database performance.
For those listening that don't fully understand what object caching is versus caching, TLDR is.
So say we're loading. We run a WP query and we load a bunch of posts on a page, right? What WordPress does is it will load the first post, and if on a normal WordPress install, it stores it in an object cache. Basically, it's just storing objects of data to reference later. So once you've loaded that post once on the page, if you reference it again further down the page, or say you have the menu twice, a header and a footer, that menu is not loading again. It actually comes from the in-page memory. The extension to that is you can have to populate the cache on a normal WordPress page. You have to do a bunch of database queries to load the data out of the database into that page requests memory, and then it's available for you. But on really high enterprise sites, you can have what's called persistent object cache. So this is either Memcache or Redis, and this is imagine a server with absolutely tons of RAM in it, and it stores all these objects in memory. So instead of doing a database query, you actually go to your object cache and load it out of that. So, and it's incredibly fast. Those things come out because it's talking about a server with like 128 gigabytes of memory. You can store tons of stuff in that, and you can load stuff out of memory that way. Is that a good? It wasn't very short, but that was my explanation of object caching.
I said TLDR, and as soon as I said it, I figured, there's no really short version of explaining this as far as I know. So, no, but I think for those who weren't aware of what it does, this is a good explanation, and very nice for you to include persistence as well.
So, what my focus has been around is lowering the number of database queries per page. So, to render a page that has 5 different database query, 5 different things. So you've got maybe a latest post on the side. You've got menu. Can we do it in a way where you load the data once and you don't have to load it again? So we alluded to it earlier, but query caching does that. So you load that query once on a page and you don't have to load it again, which is awesome.
Yeah.
The other thing is, if in doing it in the other example I was talking about featured images, there are mechanisms to prime all these caches in one go. So we added new methods to be able to load authors in one request. So if you have a page with multiple authors, because you have like the by Jonny Harris on each the byline on each item on a list page, you're loading an author each time. And before, what it was doing was it was getting to that post author, going, oh, I've not got that in memory, doing a single database query, coming back.
Again.
And if you have say you're a big news organization and you've got maybe 20 authors and on each page, you're doing 20 database queries, all completely pointlessly. Just do one database query at the top of the page, because we know all the authors at the top of the page, because when we load the post, we have in the post object, you have the ID of the author, and you just say, get me a list of all the authors, make it unique. So I don't, if I've posted multiple times on the page, I don't need to load myself twice. Nope. And then just go do a single database query to get all of those. Then load them into the object cache, and then you're good to go when you load the page. And that helps when you're rendering the page, because if you load all the data at the start of the page, all PHP is doing is just looping around data that's in cache. So it actually means that it loads like faster, because you're not stopping doing a database query coming back. It's literally just going chung, because it's already got all the data preloaded for you.
Yeah. So essentially, make it work smarter.
Yeah.
And the benefit is performance gain, but what you're describing here,
performance gain, you've got less stress on your database. So depending on what level your database server is, some database servers have like a limitation of like 100 concurrent connections, right?
Yep.
So if one page request is doing 20 database requests just to get those blooming authors,
and then
you've got 1,000 users, then you've got this massive queue that you need to get through, and a lot of the wait time on the database isn't actually the database responding. It's you being in a queue waiting for that queue to finish
the process. Yes.
Then you can do it. So, and you also got to think from a resource perspective as well. Like if you're running WordPress at scale, you might have to then run multiple database servers and do or pay more for a more expensive database server. all for the sake of like loading, a couple of lines of PHP, we can load in one go. You're saving server resources, you're saving users time, and another aspect of performance that I'm really keen to talk about is like the environmental effects of this. Like we were, how much server compute ultimately is power that we're using, power that we could be using for.
And how much are we wasting of?
And how many resources are we wasting? How much compute are we wasting? We could be using for other things, or just not using at all and saving the world power and saving greenhouse gases going into the environment.
I think you shared a tweet. I think it was you who shared a tweet where you did a calculation of the query cache landing on 6.1. What that saved in terms of time. Was that you who shared that tweet?
No, it wasn't about that.
It was.
That's
Okay,
awesome.
so somebody shared a tweet around the time 6.1 was released, where they did a calculation of, if I have 2.5 million page views on this particular site, and I know what that, I'm not changing any code other than upgrading to 6.1, then by calculation of, I think he was referencing, he was referencing your spreadsheet, then I should have this amount of savings on a month, which then translates, and then they did a whole calculation of what the costs were. And that was just based on one URL, right? So one thing that was being hyper shared. And just by looking at data, resources, and just smart way of having the code work with its data. If you can make small tweaks like that, with which obviously isn't just, I'm just writing this one line and then we're done. You iterate to eventually become the one to write that one line. But the performance gains and the resource just savings that you can do there is just, whenever I see somebody share those types of calculations, you start to think, right? So that's just one site. That's just one domain, one URL that is serving 2.5 million page views a month. But that's not the only big site. There are in terms of large sites. That's a large site, but there are huge sites that do, tenfold, 100-fold even. What does that mean in terms of what you can achieve if you start focusing on that? Which is, again, why I love what your team is doing. So 6.1 had as mentioned, had a huge impact. What are you working on right now that has potentially similar effects?
I'm going to fully admit query caching was probably one of the biggest things we're going to do, because WP query is so fundamental to WordPress. Like, it's used everywhere.
It's built around
it. It's the core of the product, really. I'm also working on WP user query caching. So when you list users out, that's going to have some massive effects in the CMS, because in the CMS you have drop downs to be able to change users. On sites that have more than, say, 10,000 users, a lot of the times those drop downs are almost unusable. And because it's rendered, it actually renders the drop down twice, like the header and the footer, and it's not cached. And it's doing this crazy database query that's doing a like search on the meta table. That we actually had to add filters into core so that enterprise sites can remove those drop downs, because they were making the list page unusable in some cases. A filter that you have to opt into is not the right solution to this. It's like, go away and fix it yourself. That's not a workable solution. It's a solution, but kind of a rude one of, go away and fix it yourself. That filter, I actually got that into core in 4.9. So this problem's been a pre-existing problem for a very, very long time. So I want to get that one merged into core, and it will help sites incredibly user rich. So BuddyPress sites, BBPress sites that are very user rich, that'll be massively useful. As I alluded to earlier as well, I'm also working on full site editing themes at the moment, so block-based themes. Basically, there's some performance issues around, theme.json that was added in 5.8.
Yep.
Basically, parsing JSON files and then looping through arrays can be incredibly expensive, and because a lot of that stuff wasn't cached, you were looping through these database things like in some occasions like 15,000 or 20,000 times per page request.
You would loop through what?
So what it does is it creates this data object that's mixing data from theme JSON, from global styles, from block patterns. Like it just creates a massive mega object of all the data that a block-based theme needs in one place. So we did actually a ton of work in this in 6.1 that wasn't really sung about, but we did some amazing performance work there, and Felix are currently working on getting some of that. Just again, as I was saying, you just process it once at the top of the page, similar to database requests, and it doesn't change. Unless you're editing your theme, you're actively developing it. That data should just be cached. Should be processed once and cached. But to architect that, there's not anywhere else in core where we're parsing a JSON file and caching it in memory. So we're kind of inventing some new caching mechanisms and some caching ideas, because previously everything's been in the database. Now we're kind of mixing JSON files, because the issue there is if you edit the actual file, then you need to cache and validate. How do you do that in doing local development and all that sort of stuff? There's a lot of complicated problems. A lot of people are spending a lot of time to optimize the code. So doing these, using Blackfire to find these micro optimizations. So one amazing performance piece we got into 6.1.1 was replacing calls to the function array merge with just standard adding things to arrays. Array merge is a function call where you take two arrays and you merge them together. Unfortunately, it can be incredibly expensive to run it. And as it was running 20,000 times on a page load, it was crippling the page.
Yeah.
And just converting it from using one function to the code does exactly the same thing, but just not using this one function, had some amazing performance effects. And I might actually tweet out about that, because I think people need to know about that change.
That's an interesting one, because I wasn't aware that was added to 6.1.1. But that's a perfect example of optimizing code that you can only find if you actually are monitoring, because there's no way, because array merge, that's a pretty default type of solution to use if you need to merge arrays. There's nothing, you don't give two thoughts about it, you just use the function as you know it's available.
But that's also a problem. You kind of highlight a problem there with WordPress in general. I think the assumption is that WordPress itself is performant, and that I can just call WP query as many times as I want as a developer. I know when I was a developer coming up that I was just like, oh yeah, WordPress just works, right? It's kind of like the Apple approach of like, oh, it just works.
Yeah.
And
we do like to sell that story as WordPress.
Yeah, but for the most part, I'm not saying WordPress isn't performant, but there's some, if you are doing more advanced things with WP query and you're looping through stuff and you don't know how it works under the hood, you can really build some horrible code that is not performant.
I've seen it.
And we all have, and plugins, not to name and shame, but plugins that should know better. People, you go, whoa, like,
how did you miss this one?
How did you miss this one? And that's why it's so important to have these tools when you're developing plugins. You need to have Query Monitor installed. You need to be using Blackfire, these tools, because in some cases, just passing the right parameters to a WP query can save tens of milliseconds. You can save millions of database requests. Just by not priming meta if you don't need it. Just by not priming terms if you don't need it. Like there's and I'm so keen. Like I'm very active on Twitter, and I'm trying to highlight this stuff because in some cases I'm finding out for the first time. Oh, why are we loading this data? We don't need it. We'll just turn that off. Like we need to enable. It's not making core better is one part of the story. The performance team's working on a plugin checker to also help bring the plugins ecosystem up, because we can make core as performance whatever, but if plugins come along and destroy that performance, then there's kind of no point. Like we need both parts need to be performant.
Your example reminds me of we had WordCamp Netherlands 2 months back, and one of the speakers, Niels de Blauw, he talked about the REST API and specifically how to make the REST API more performant. And I'm pretty sure that 99 out of 100 people you ask that work with the REST API daily, and you ask them, do you know there's a more performant way to make the same database query through the REST API? They go like, no, you just call the parameter of whatever you want. You add another parameter if you want more specificity, and then you build your REST API URL. And he showed that there's a few, I don't know what you call them, but a few sort of filter things you can add at the back that just says, no, I only want this, or I only want that. Almost close to, I'm going to butcher this comparison, but kind of in a GraphQL type way, where you only you only get what you query instead of the whole object, the whole array, the whole thing.
So
that was a great talk.
As the maintainer of the REST API, I'm very keen to. I'd love to see that talk. But one of the things we did in 6.1 was, if you ever do a REST API request, you have a bunch of fields in there, but you also have what are called links. So it links to sub objects of a type. So, for example, for a post, it will link to the author, it will link to the categories, all the terms that are linked to it, and it will link to the revisions. What we're doing is, what it does now is, and all of those, it does it per post. So it'll do a database query to get its categories, it will get author, it will get its revisions. Revisions is another WP query that will get all of its child revisions. We did one small change that would say, if you do a REST API, you can pass fields and say, I just want the post IDs, or I just want the titles, or whatever. Before, even if you weren't rendering the links, it was still doing the database queries for them, and we just got rid of that. Again, it's just these optimizations. Like, you just assume that a lot of these things are.
So that's what I meant with from 100 developers. I'm pretty sure the vast majority, I'm calling it 99%, don't know how to optimize default stuff provided by WordPress, because like you said, it just works, right? So we stop thinking about how can we do this in a smarter way, unless you're forced to, because you implemented something on scale. And but not everybody has the fortune to work with something that is actually in scale, right? So, like I said, the moment you start having page views above 1 million a month, you have decent traffic. That's traffic that you can actually start measuring, right? Your data set of what is happening is becoming large enough for you to draw conclusions from. Not everybody has that benefit. Not everybody works with those types of clients, and that's fine. Not everybody has to per se, but once you start working with those, you have to start developing your skill set in a particular direction where you can no longer not see, right? So once the veil is lifted, you go like, oh, okay, there's got to be a smarter way for this as well.
But it's not always just about whether your client needs that amount of traffic. You never know when you're going to be attacked by someone, right? So for sure. I was talking earlier about working for a big magazine company, and I won't say the brand, but they'd written a review that a certain person didn't like, so they'd paid a company to attack us. So they were hitting the REST API, and because there was a problem in the REST API, it was it was, it was getting uncached traffic, and
Yeah.
it was really starting to affect us. And you never know on the web whether your website will blow up. I mean, Reddit's a thing still, and Twitter. You never know
Yeah.
whether you'll have these massive traffic spikes. And a lot of these performance things are just how you build it. Oftentimes, it's not that much more effort to just call a function that primes post caches. Like, we've added a bunch of core methods now that you can just prime the authors, you can prime the meta, you can prime all post all this stuff. It's literally just one line of code, and you pass an array of object of posts, and it will prime it for you. Part of this work was not just to provide tools for people to do this.
Yeah.
And I want to sing and shout about these things, and there should be more blog posts about, like, there are these cool tools now that if you need to prime the stuff, you don't even necessarily need to do it. But if you know that you're loading this data, just call this one function. It'll do its magic behind the scenes for you, and it will be more performant than if you didn't call it.
So we're actually getting into the stage where we can rely on it just works.
Yeah, because there's always going to be, little Jonny 15 years ago when he's just starting out. There's always going to be that level of developer that doesn't have the time or the skill or the energy to do this. They just want to build a theme on top of it. We should also give the tools for the medium and the higher level developers that do know more about what they're doing and enable it. But we can only help them so much. You can take this beautifully performant code and make it unperformant by just poor practices. There's no way we can help that. We can only, again, getting back to the mentor idea, if you see this code, or you can contribute back, or if you see it, you have to bring people up. A lot of people, when I was coming up, helped me when I was doing bad things. Like, it's the way we learn.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I didn't mean it in a negative way. I meant more of a lot of people working with WordPress, like we mentioned before, they assume it's just going to work. We are coming to a stage now where we can more reliably say, yes, it just works. But yeah, the whole mentor thing, I think we're doing, as far as I can tell, and I say this specifically because I'm pretty much in the bubble. I don't think I've been working with WordPress for 17, almost 18 years now. I'm not very much in tune with what it is to look from the full outside in. So that's my perspective. But as far as I can tell, we're doing a much better job in educating new people onboarding to WordPress, and not just on Contributors Day at WordCamps, not just on the site, but I think as a mentality, I think I recognize it happening more than, for instance, when I started, definitely, because that was just in its infancy. I started working with WordPress seriously in 2006. So I think for the first 4 years, I was just cruising on whatever I could find in the forums and documentation here and there, and just hope the best. But I with learn.wordpress.org there, with developer.wordpress.org there, there's a lot of solid information. Yeah, I think we're getting to the stage where we can say we're doing our best, instead of we got some information here and there. I think that is a change that has happened.
I think a big part of it is about consistency. Like, if like now WP query is cached, the only query class that isn't cached is WP user query, right? Yeah. So from the outside perspective, if everything, there are 7 query classes. If one of them doesn't, you would expect it to do that, right? So consistency is really important in that way of, like, you don't have this weird, like, oh, this is,
if I can do it here,
weird,
I can do it over there as well. Yeah, exactly.
And unfortunately, as a new user, I think there is a lot of inconsistencies in the CMS at the moment. That's one thing I'd love to see is a UI simplification and more consistency, because like the list page and the editor look very different to me, and they feel very different applications. And I wish there was a bit more consistent, because like this one's like 10 years old, right? Because we haven't touched it, we haven't reskinned the CMS in a while. But like from a new perspective, as a new user coming in, you like, oh, this looks completely different from this, and this feels different from this, because this one's React and it's like auto reloading and doing this whiz bang stuff, and this is like old school forms. So
if
that's one thing I would love to see.
If WordPress could talk, it would say something. Hey man, I'm just in a transitional phase right now. Just hold on. Because that is what it is.
But to a new user, they don't know that.
No.
I agree. They see the inconsistencies, don't they? And they go, and it must be like, oh, this is jarring. Like the screen looks kind of from 10 years ago, and this other one is like,
and we'd be like, yes, you're right. It is 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't remember what the last actual UI overhaul was. That was MP6, I think, introduced, or am I?
Yeah, MP6, but that was 2013, maybe.
Yeah, I'm a little fuzzy on years. I think that's 2013-14. Yeah, I think that was the last major UX and UI overhaul that we saw. But like I said, I'm not 100% sure. It may just be me filtering away, because I remember MP6 being as a separate project and then eventually merged to Core. So that's something that's stuck. I have one last question for you.
Sure.
And that is mostly, so there's different ways of asking the question, but it's very put simply is, what excites you the most for the future of WordPress? I think I kind of have, because I think I got sort of your answer between the lines, but like from a performance standpoint, from a where are we going with this, what are you most excited about for the future?
I have mental targets of where I think WordPress should be. I think the full site editing themes should be as performant as classic themes. I want to be using all these new and wonderful functionalities built into browsers, like lazy loading images, modern image formats like WebP. Like because WordPress is so much of the internet, it's 43%, 44%, whatever the percentage is now. We have such an opportunity to make the web a more performant place.
Yeah,
we can open it up to people into the developing world who have poor internet connections, and information is such an amazing tool to bring people out of poverty. They can learn things. They can learn so much, and to give the developing world the internet is so powerful and so useful, and that's what I'm excited for. Is really democratizing publishing. Like, I know that's the catchphrase, but to give it to the developing world, and to not use these resources unnecessarily. That the developing world and resources are the two things that really get me up in the morning about performance. Like, why are these? There's millions and millions of servers sitting in racks doing pointless work that they don't need to do.
Yeah,
we can get the same result by just these. And to be honest, again, I'm only doing a very limited amount of time on this. Have a massive impact on.
I was going to say that limited time has a huge impact already. Yeah,
that's what's really exciting about that. That so much of this is just stuff that people haven't had the time to focus on. Like, it's just tweaking a few lines of code can have these massive amounts of effect, and that's what's so exciting to me. That it's so much of this is low hanging fruit, and we can make the web better by my very minimal amount of effort.
I hear you. I see the same thing. All right. Thank you so much for being my guinea.
It was fun.
Glad to hear. People can check you out on Twitter, the Spaced Monkey. I guess I should start asking about people's monikers, why they're using what they're using. But I think I've asked yours way back when, the Spaced Monkey. I kind of vaguely remember.
It was just my nickname on MSN, and it just became my brand.
Yeah.
I think I've been using it since I was 13. It's the name of my company. So my website is spacemonkey.com. I blog about performance stuff and all the WordPress core stuff I do as well there. It's just stuck, and it's my brand now, and it will be with me for the rest of the time. I don't hate it.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful because it's definitely a unique one. Plus, I have a visual image of what that would look like. So,
yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jonny.
Take care.